The habit of over-explaining often appears innocent on the surface, yet it carries a heavy psychological history beneath its layers. It begins subtly with the need to clarify intentions, justify decisions, or provide extra context that others never asked for. But this behavior is rarely about communication alone. At its core, over-explaining is a protective reflex, a way to preempt misunderstanding, rejection, or criticism. For many, it traces back to environments where their words were doubted, their feelings dismissed, or their actions constantly scrutinized. They learned that simply stating something once wasn't enough to be believed or accepted, so they compensated by over-clarifying everything in hopes of avoiding conflict or disapproval. This pattern often forms in childhood when a person grows up in households where trust is fragile or conditional. Maybe their caregivers frequently misinterpreted their intentions, or they had to defend themselves against unfair accusations. Over time, this taught the nervous system to anticipate misunderstanding before it even happens. Instead of waiting to be questioned, they over-explain to create a sense of control in unpredictable emotional landscapes. It becomes less about sharing information and more about managing other people's reactions to protect themselves from emotional harm. In adulthood, this habit can manifest in conversations with friends, partners, or colleagues. A simple, "I can't make it tonight," turns into a long, detailed explanation about why they can't attend, often accompanied by unnecessary justifications. It's as if they're subconsciously pleading, "Please don't be upset with me," even when no one has shown signs of frustration. The over-explaining becomes a shield against imagined threats, a way to keep themselves emotionally safe by covering every possible angle that could lead to judgment or rejection. This behavior also reveals an internal struggle with self-worth and boundaries. People who over-explain often carry a deep fear of being misunderstood, which is intertwined with the belief that their truth alone isn't valid unless others agree with it. They rely on excessive detail to earn acceptance, not realizing that this can sometimes create the opposite effect. It may overwhelm the listener or subtly communicate insecurity. Yet, within this pattern lies a story of survival. Over-explaining was once a strategy that helped them navigate unstable relationships, unpredictable authority figures, or emotionally volatile environments, and it became woven into the fabric of how they relate to the world. The need to control everything is often misunderstood as a desire for dominance, when in truth it is more commonly born from fear and past instability. People who develop this habit rarely do so out of arrogance. Instead, it stems from living through unpredictable or chaotic experiences that taught them that safety is never guaranteed. Control becomes their way of creating a sense of order in a world that once felt threatening. When the environment around them was filled with sudden changes, broken promises, or emotional volatility, the mind adapted by gripping tightly to anything it could manage. Control becomes a survival mechanism, not a personality trait. This behavior often begins in childhood, where instability leaves lasting imprints on the psyche. A child who grows up in a household marked by inconsistency, where rules change daily, emotions swing unpredictably, or caregivers are unreliable, learns to find security in predictability. But when predictability doesn't exist naturally, they create it by trying to control their surroundings. They plan every detail, monitor every outcome, and sometimes take responsibility for things that were never theirs to carry. This excessive vigilance offers a fragile sense of stability in an otherwise unstable world. In adulthood, this need can manifest in relationships, work, and daily routines. They may struggle to delegate tasks, fearing that if they let go, things will fall apart. They plan conversations in their heads before they happen, obsess over small details, or react strongly to last-minute changes. It's not that they lack trust in others, it's that their nervous system has learned to equate control with safety. Even minor unpredictabilities can trigger deep anxiety, as if the past chaos is threatening to resurface through the cracks of the present moment. This habit also reflects a profound internal conflict. On one hand, the individual craves peace and stability. On the other hand, their methods to achieve it often create tension in relationships and within themselves. Controlling everything requires constant vigilance, which is emotionally exhausting. Yet, letting go feels dangerous because their mind remembers what happened when things were out of control before. Their grip tightens not because they want power over others, but because they fear the emotional cost of powerlessness. Beneath the surface, control is not about perfection, but about protection from old wounds that once left them feeling small, helpless, and unsafe. Difficulty accepting compliments may appear as modesty, but beneath the surface, it often reveals deeper layers of emotional history. For many, praise doesn't land as a simple act of kindness. It triggers discomfort, disbelief, or even a subtle sense of threat. When someone struggles to receive a compliment, it's rarely about the compliment itself. It's about the internalized beliefs they carry about their own worth. If a person grew up in environments where validation was rare, conditional, or accompanied by criticism, they may have learned to distrust positive feedback altogether. Compliments feel foreign, like words that don't quite fit the self-image they've constructed over time. In childhood, this pattern often develops through repeated experiences of being overlooked, undervalued, or subtly shamed for their achievements. A child who rarely hears affirmations may grow into an adult who questions their legitimacy when praise finally comes. They might think, are they just being polite? Or they don't really mean it, because genuine validation wasn't something they could rely on before. In some cases, praise was weaponized, followed by higher expectations, jealousy, or mockery. So the mind learned to associate compliments with emotional traps rather than warmth. Over time, this creates an instinctive barrier where positive feedback is deflected, minimized, or brushed aside before it can settle in. In adulthood, this habit shows up in many subtle ways. When someone says, "You did a great job," the response might be, "Oh, it was nothing," or "I just got lucky," as if their contribution isn't worthy of genuine recognition. Even in romantic or close relationships, compliments can make them uneasy, prompting them to change the subject quickly or downplay their qualities. It's not that they dislike praise, it's that praise challenges the narrative they've lived with for so long. Accepting it would mean confronting the gap between how others see them and how they see themselves, a gap that can feel unsettling and unfamiliar. This difficulty also reflects how deeply self-worth can be shaped by past emotional experiences. People who are uncomfortable with compliments often carry an internal voice that questions their value, a voice formed by old wounds and repeated patterns of invalidation. Compliments clash with this voice, creating cognitive dissonance. Instead of embracing the positive reflection, they instinctively push it away, not out of arrogance or coldness, but because part of them has never fully learned how to feel safe in being seen and appreciated. Hyper-independence often looks like strength from the outside, but inside it is frequently rooted in old wounds and survival patterns. It is not simply a preference for self-reliance. It is a deep-seated response to experiences where depending on others led to pain, disappointment, or betrayal. For many, hyper-independence develops in childhood environments where trust was broken repeatedly. If caregivers were absent, neglectful, or unpredictable, the child learns early that relying on others is dangerous. To protect themselves, they build a psychological fortress, teaching their minds and hearts that the safest person to depend on is themselves. What begins as a survival strategy slowly hardens into a way of living. This behavior often forms through repeated emotional injuries. When someone reaches out for support and is met with rejection, ridicule, or abandonment, their nervous system remembers that moment. It stores the message. Depending on others leads to pain. Over time, this message becomes a core belief, shaping relationships and decisions in adulthood. Instead of asking for help, they push through challenges alone. Instead of expressing vulnerability, they wear a mask of self-sufficiency. Every time they manage alone, it reinforces their sense of control and safety, even if it comes at the cost of emotional isolation. In adult life, hyper-independence can manifest in subtle but powerful ways. They may struggle to delegate tasks, avoid relying on friends or partners, or downplay their struggles even when overwhelmed. Offers of help might be politely declined, not out of pride, but out of fear of the unpredictability that comes with letting others in. Even in moments of genuine need, they may retreat inward, convincing themselves that it's better to endure alone than risk the emotional vulnerability of depending on someone else. This habit can create a paradox where they long for connection, but simultaneously keep everyone at a distance. Hyper-independence is also closely tied to control and self-protection. By doing everything alone, they eliminate the variables that come with trusting others. It gives them a sense of certainty, even if it also builds invisible walls around their emotional world. Their fierce independence is not a rejection of others, but a shield against the pain of being let down again. It is a pattern born from experiences that taught them self-reliance as a necessity, not merely a choice, and it continues to shape how they navigate trust, intimacy, and vulnerability. Avoidance of conflict often seems like a desire for harmony, but beneath the surface, it frequently reveals deeper emotional conditioning shaped by past experiences. For many, conflict is not just uncomfortable, it feels threatening. Their nervous system responds to disagreements as if danger is near, even when the situation is mild. This reaction usually traces back to earlier environments where conflict was explosive, unpredictable, or emotionally damaging. If someone grew up in a household where arguments led to yelling, silent treatments, or even violence, their mind learned to associate confrontation with pain. Over time, this association becomes automatic, driving them to avoid any situation that might lead to emotional turbulence. This habit often develops in childhood when a child witnesses frequent fights or experiences direct conflict with caregivers. In such settings, standing up for oneself might have led to punishment, rejection, or being ignored. The child learns that staying quiet, agreeable, or invisible is safer than voicing disagreement. As they grow older, this adaptive strategy evolves into conflict avoidance in adult relationships. Instead of expressing boundaries, they stay silent. Instead of addressing issues directly, they minimize their feelings or pretend everything is fine. This is not because they lack opinions or emotions, but because their internal safety system prioritizes peace over self-expression. In adulthood, this avoidance can show up in various subtle ways. They might accommodate others to prevent disagreements, agree to things they don't truly want, or quickly change the subject when tension arises. Even small differences can trigger a sense of unease, leading them to withdraw emotionally or physically from the situation. In relationships, this often results in unresolved issues accumulating over time as real feelings are suppressed in favor of temporary calm. The person may believe they're maintaining harmony, but underneath, resentment and emotional distance slowly build. This pattern also reflects a complex relationship with fear and self-worth. People who avoid conflict often fear that asserting themselves will lead to rejection, abandonment, or emotional chaos. Their instinct is to keep the peace at all costs, even when it comes at the expense of their own needs. They may internalize the belief that their voice causes trouble, so they silence it to preserve stability. Avoiding conflict becomes less about genuine harmony and more about self-protection, a learned strategy to navigate environments where expressing oneself once felt dangerous or futile. Apologizing excessively might seem like politeness on the surface, but beneath it often lies a deeper emotional history shaped by fear, guilt, and learned survival strategies. People who constantly say sorry for things that don't require an apology are usually not doing so out of habit alone. It's a protective reflex. Their nervous system has been conditioned to believe that preemptively apologizing can prevent negative reactions, conflicts, or rejection. This behavior often develops in environments where criticism was harsh, mistakes were punished severely, or emotional safety was uncertain. By apologizing quickly and frequently, they try to neutralize potential threats before they escalate. In many cases, this pattern begins during childhood. If a child grows up in a household where they are blamed for things beyond their control, or where love and approval are withdrawn after small errors, they learn to associate mistakes with emotional pain. Saying sorry becomes a shield, a way to minimize the impact of their presence or actions. Even when they've done nothing wrong, they might apologize to diffuse tension, avoid punishment, or make themselves appear less threatening. Over time, this coping mechanism becomes deeply ingrained, turning into an automatic response rather than a conscious choice. In adulthood, excessive apologizing can manifest in conversations, relationships, and professional settings. Someone might apologize for asking a question, for expressing their opinion, or for simply existing in a shared space. They may say, sorry, when someone else bumps into them, or when they take up space in a way that feels undeserved. These apologies often go unnoticed by others, but they reveal an internalized belief that their presence is somehow inconvenient or burdensome. It reflects a subtle but powerful feeling of unworthiness, as if they must constantly justify their right to occupy space without causing harm. This behavior also signals a heightened sensitivity to the emotions of others. People who over-apologize are often hyper, attuned to shifts in tone, body language, or facial expressions, scanning for signs of disapproval. Their apologies act as emotional bandages, trying to fix problems that may not even exist. It's not that they enjoy apologizing, it's that it offers a sense of temporary safety in uncertain interactions. This pattern can lead to a diminished sense of self, as their instinct to appease others overshadows their ability to assert boundaries or express their needs confidently. Over productivity and perfectionism often disguise themselves as ambition, discipline, or high standards. But beneath these behaviors lies a complex psychological landscape shaped by early experiences of conditional acceptance, fear of failure, and the desire for emotional safety. For many, working excessively or striving for flawlessness isn't just about achievement, it's about proving their worth. When love, praise, or a sense of belonging were tied to performance in the past, the mind learns to equate doing with being valued. Productivity becomes more than a task. It becomes an identity, a shield against feelings of inadequacy, and a way to control how others perceive them. This pattern often begins in childhood environments, where success was praised but emotional needs were overlooked. A child who is only celebrated when they excel may internalize the message that their worth depends on what they achieve, not who they are. Perfectionism then becomes a way to secure love and avoid criticism, while overworking provides a sense of control and predictability in a world that once felt emotionally unstable. Even small mistakes might have led to disappointment or rejection, teaching the child that the safest path is flawless performance and constant productivity. In adulthood, this manifests as a relentless drive to achieve, even when the body and mind are exhausted. Rest can feel uncomfortable or undeserved because their self-worth is tied to output. They may push themselves beyond reasonable limits, obsess over details, or fear delegating tasks in case others don't meet their exacting standards. Every success offers only brief relief before the next task takes its place, creating a cycle that never truly ends. Perfectionism turns into a moving target, always just out of reach, leaving the person trapped in a loop of striving and self-criticism. This behavior also reflects a deep fear of vulnerability. By excelling constantly, they can keep others from seeing their insecurities or flaws. Productivity becomes a form of armor, perfectionism a way to control potential rejection. It's not about enjoying the work itself, but about managing the fear that arises when they slow down or make mistakes. Their achievements often mask inner feelings of inadequacy, as if no amount of doing can quiet the voice that whispers they're still not enough. Beneath the polished exterior, this pattern reveals an emotional history where being perfect felt safer than simply being human. Emotional numbing and detachment are often misunderstood as coldness or indifference. But in reality, they are powerful protective mechanisms shaped by overwhelming experiences. When someone has endured emotional pain that felt too intense to process, the mind learns to shut down emotional responses as a way of surviving. This is not a conscious decision, but an adaptive reaction to situations where feeling deeply was either dangerous, unbearable, or simply not allowed. Over time, this emotional shutdown becomes habitual, creating a sense of distance from both painful and pleasurable emotions. The individual may seem calm, unaffected, or composed, but inside there is often a quiet disconnection that shields them from vulnerability. This pattern often begins in environments where emotional expression was unsafe or discouraged. If a child grows up in a household where feelings were ignored, punished, or met with chaos, the safest option becomes silence and detachment. Their nervous system adapts by numbing emotional responses to avoid further harm. When sadness, anger, or fear are repeatedly dismissed, the mind concludes that emotional experiences are threats rather than natural expressions. Over time, this leads to an internal disconnection where emotions become muted or difficult to access altogether. What started as a survival strategy eventually turns into an ingrained way of relating to the world. In adulthood, emotional numbing manifests in subtle but impactful ways. They may struggle to connect deeply in relationships, finding it difficult to express affection, vulnerability, or empathy, even when they want to. Moments that should feel joyful might pass by with a sense of flatness, and painful experiences may be met with intellectual analysis rather than emotional engagement. They often feel like observers of their own lives, present physically, but emotionally distant, as if watching events through a fogged glass. This detachment can create confusion for both themselves and those around them, as their emotional reactions seem blunted or delayed. This behavior is also closely linked to avoidance of pain. By numbing themselves, they prevent overwhelming feelings from resurfacing, but this also blocks their capacity to fully experience joy, love, or connection. It's a trade-off between emotional safety and emotional richness. While numbing provides temporary relief, it also reinforces the internal barrier that keeps them distant from their own inner world. This emotional disconnection reflects not weakness, but resilience, a learned strategy to navigate environments that once made authentic emotional expression feel dangerous or futile. People pleasing and lack of boundaries often emerge as adaptive behaviors formed in environments where love, acceptance, or safety were conditional. On the surface, people pleasing can look like kindness, generosity, or selflessness, but beneath these actions lies a deeper psychological pattern driven by fear of rejection and the need for emotional security. Many individuals who develop this habit have experienced situations where their worth was tied to how well they met the needs of others. They learned that harmony was maintained not by expressing their own needs, but by prioritizing everyone else's. Over time, this behavior becomes automatic, shaping their identity around being agreeable, helpful, and accommodating, often at the expense of their own well-being. This pattern frequently begins in childhood, especially in families where emotional stability depends on the child's compliance. If caregivers were volatile, critical, or emotionally unavailable, the child may have learned that pleasing them was the only way to avoid conflict or gain affection. Their developing sense of self becomes entangled with the role of caretaker, mediator, or peacemaker. Instead of learning that their needs matter, they absorb the belief that their value comes from making others happy. This belief follows them into adulthood, influencing relationships, work dynamics, and social interactions, often leading them to suppress their true feelings to keep the peace. In adult life, people pleasing can manifest in countless subtle ways. They may say yes when they want to say no, overextend themselves to avoid disappointing others, or stay silent when their boundaries are crossed. They anticipate other people's needs, sometimes before those needs are even expressed, and adjust their behavior accordingly. Their sense of safety becomes tied to others' approval, and even minor signs of disapproval can trigger intense anxiety or guilt. This constant vigilance keeps them in a state of emotional overextension, where their own desires are consistently pushed aside to maintain external harmony. lack of boundaries is deeply intertwined with this pattern because they prioritize others' comfort over their own. Setting clear boundaries can feel selfish, threatening, or even dangerous. They may fear that asserting themselves will lead to rejection, abandonment, or conflict, echoing the emotional experiences of their past. As a result, their relationships can become unbalanced, with them giving far more than they receive, often feeling drained, unseen, or unappreciated. This dynamic reflects a learned survival strategy where pleasing others and dissolving personal boundaries once offered emotional protection in unpredictable or conditional environments.